How many times do you go to a website and you have like no idea what the company even does? Just like, what is this? And if you're a job seeker, especially if you're like sit on the product side and it's not clear, it's like a total red flag. You just like want to opt out because you're like, I don't even know what the hell I'm building. And so, what do you make? Who's it for? And why do they care? Is like the best prompt.
This episode of Coffee with Closers, I'm sitting down with Nate Guggia, co-founder and head of brand at Before You Apply. Nate has extensive experience in employer branding and talent acquisition. Stay tuned for my conversation with Nate, where he shares practical advice for business leaders on how to attract best-in-class talent by leveraging employer branding. Hey, Nate, I'm excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Most certainly. Well, every entrepreneur has an interesting story of how they overcame obstacles to become an entrepreneur. I was looking at your resume on your LinkedIn. You have a couple of companies that you founded. You also been in the sales role and marketing role for pretty long time.
Yeah.
You also started your own podcast, and now you're running Before You Apply, which is pretty much a platform for helping organizations to kind of get a taste of what that company and the company culture looks like for people before they apply for a job at the company. So you want to share a little bit with our audience about your entrepreneurial journey on how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. I started off out of college. I worked in the wine business, being from California. I had a really cool introduction into that industry. It was an amazing time being in my 20s and just like working in that space. I learned a ton. Actually, like I can still talk wine many years later. But it was weird. I didn't realize that like running my own show was something that I'd be interested in. Until I came across an opportunity. Somebody just like was talking to me about it. I was kind of unhappy in my role working in the wine business. Somebody said, you should look into selling insurance, which is kind of funny now that I think back on it. And I had no idea like what that meant or why, whatever, but I was told that I could make my own schedule and I could make as much money as I wanted to. And being in my 20s, I just thought like, oh, that sounds like the coolest thing ever. And so I ended up like pivoting, like doing a 180 and just like going into the insurance business. And I was actually like pretty successful. It was in my local area. I knew a lot of business owners. Like it just kind of worked. And I ended up kind of like leveling up as I learned more and more about personal finance and, kind of like taking me on this, like, I guess you can call it a journey. It sounds super cliche, but like everything that I've done has just been like, I see an opportunity and I kind of like take it, or I develop the relationships I need in order to get me there. And then that opens up something new as I start learning more about something. It's like, that's just kind of how things have always worked out for me. I very much have like I've never waited for things for like people to choose me in a way. I've always like kind of been very proactive to go after the things that I wanted. I have a very, very high tolerance for risk when it comes to my professional life. It's very hard for my wife, to be honest. It is. She's the opposite of me, but it's just something that's kind of built into my DNA. And so it allows me to like kind of go for things when I see opportunity, surround myself with the right people, and just kind of like keep leveling myself up. And I've been doing that for like, 20 years now, I guess. So yeah, I guess I'll kind of stop there, but that's kind of just like my mentality when it comes to things is I just like kind of like look at a situation. If something is presented to me, I kind of like go, all right, who are the people I need to know in this space? How do I how do I cut my timeline down to be as short as possible to get me to success? Sometimes it works out. It doesn't always work out. It's kind of like, it's kind of how this like, this path works. But I just can't imagine doing it any differently.
Yeah. I mean, that's the entrepreneurial way, right? Like you just have to take the risk. And I think it's good that you have a fine balance with your spouse that kind of the opposite of you. So it can, help you have the balance in life when it comes to making decisions that might be a little crazy.
Yeah. I know they do seem, you're bringing up actually like a really good point because, I think like, I guess people who don't have this, the approach or the risk tolerance, or, they take maybe more of a traditional path when it comes to their professional life. They look at entrepreneurs and they go, wow, that's like a really risky way to be, and I was actually talking to my wife about it just this morning. And I said, it's like, I don't think of it as risky because I'm the one doing it. To me, it feels like the safest way to go because I'm the one who's in control. And of course that has like, there's like pros and cons to it, but it actually makes me feel safe.
Yeah, most certainly. So where did the idea for Before You Apply actually came about?
Yeah. So let's see. So I haven't I think if I look at like my professional life, I've been maybe an entrepreneur for half of it, and I've been an employee for another half. So it's like, it's kind of weird. It's like I'm not like a serial entrepreneur by any means. I was working for an agency based out of San Francisco that does employer branding. I ended up, I was like, this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I was actively job seeking. I came across this company on Angel List, and I had a recruiting background. I'd spent some time in recruiting, and I saw this company that was doing this like extremely creative work that was related to recruiting, but it wasn't recruiting. And everything about their brand was just like very human. The way the copy on their website, everything about like applying for the job and like blog posts they wanted you to read before interviews and everything. It was just like, it was just extremely human. I fell in love with them without ever even knowing them. Right. Just like from the beginning. So I applied. I had a couple of interviews with the founders. I ended up, this is like I'm getting to a point, which is like why we do Before You Apply. And we can talk about like the recruitment, marketing and stuff, part of that in a second. But this is like the best example I have is that the first time I interviewed with them, I actually didn't end up getting the job. But I had such an incredible experience and connection with the founders of that company that it was kind of sad. Like when I remember, I'll never forget, they called me and told me like, hey, we chose somebody else. I could tell like they were like sad about it, but it just wasn't the right fit. But I had such a connection with them that I just like wanted to proactively stay in touch with them as people. And so like every few months or so, I would reach out to them. I'd send them an email. I'd like ask them how they were doing. I knew they had a baby, whatever it was, it was just like, I just wanted to stay in touch with them because they were just super cool people. I ended up taking another job. Like I went into SaaS and I was like an AE at a SaaS company. And, and then like about a year later, they reached back out to me and said, hey, like the person we hired didn't end up working out. We've done some shifts with the company. Would you be interested in talking now? So we did. They ended up hiring me. The timing actually for everybody was much better. And I ended up going to work for this agency in this like unique part of the industry called employer branding. I knew nothing about it. And once I got in and kind of got my feet wet, I realized that like I connected some dots and I was like, oh, I'm really passionate about marketing. I see how this is just like marketing, but to job seekers. And when I did that, I got really inspired and I started like really seeing how that industry could evolve and change. And I developed some opinions about it. And I started like putting those thoughts out on LinkedIn. And I ended up like, I've kind of developed this like personal brand on LinkedIn about like this area of the space or this area of like recruiting about like how companies can like market and brand themselves to job seekers. And then after a couple of years of working in that agency, one of the founders of that company and we started building Before You Apply inside of the agency. And at first we thought it was just going to be like a new kind of like offering or maybe an extension of the business. And it took off pretty fast. We saw there was a real business opportunity there. So after building it and kind of getting it some legs, we spun it off as its own company. And we've been doing that for the last couple of years. And so that's kind of like, I had a weird like path into building Before You Apply because I was an employee. I learned a lot about the space, developed like a pretty deep level of domain expertise. And then, spun the company out and then like, so here we are. So it was like, it's pretty unique in like a pretty uncommon way to build a business. But like for me, it worked out really, really well because it kind of was the best of both worlds,
So when I'm looking at, you touched on the employer branding a couple of times, right? So most people kind of understand the concept of branding and why you need to have a good logo and a website and good marketing messages, and all those are mostly focused from an acquisition of customers, not from an acquisition of new talent.
Sure.
So, and you see companies like Built-in or LinkedIn, even a Glassdoor, they all have premium profiles where you can go pay extra money to get companies listed there. So I know there's, recruiters probably understand this more, but my entrepreneurs are the listeners of my show. So talk to us, our audience, a little bit more about the importance of employer branding in especially attracting talent, and what kind of goes into building a strong brand from that perspective.
Yeah, it's something that it's been kind of historically neglected. Most of the attention has been given to what generates revenue, and I understand readily. So it's what keeps the lights on. But recruiting has operated almost on its own. Sales has the support of marketing. Recruiting has the support of basically no one. So recruiters are there's a lot of brute force in the world of recruiting. It's especially if we're talking about tech, which is where we work. We typically work with more early mid-stage VC-backed tech companies, who are recruiting really high demand talent. We're talking about software engineers. We're talking about really skilled salespeople. You have young companies recruiting senior level people. It's a total mismatch, right? And so it's why would a senior level person want to take on that risk, like we were talking about earlier, to go work with a startup who might be building something cool but doesn't have the track record that big tech has? Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of startups are faced with. But you can translate that story into legacy brands who are trying to rebrand themselves to the next gen of talent or whatever. It kind of applies across every industry. Mm-hmm. But recruiters haven't had this enablement piece. They haven't had this way of warming up the market. So when they go out to it, there is a level of familiarity, or there's a story to tell, things like that get people at least interested in raising their hand and saying, yeah, I'll have a conversation about this opportunity. And so that's the way we think about it. And especially if it's for entrepreneurs, for founders, business owners, it's this is the opportunity to tell the story that you want to tell, because a lot of times that's out of your hands. It's recruiters are going out, whether you're working with an agency or you have your own in-house team, whatever, you have other people going out on your behalf, on behalf of your company, trying to gain the interest of talent. It's not often that you, as the business owner, especially as the business starts to scale, that you get to tell the story that you want to tell. And I think that's where, for entrepreneurs, that's how they should look at employer branding and positioning when it comes to recruiting, is what is the story that you want to tell, that you were able to tell when the business was super young, but now that things have evolved, you've become a little bit more distanced. How do you shorten that gap and make sure that the story about your company and why you created it and the cool things you're doing and the impact that you're having, how do you make sure that doesn't get lost? Because the more that you as an entrepreneur are able to get that message out, the more that the people that you're hiring or the people that you hope to hire are going to attach to it. And it's just going to make it easier for your recruiting team to hire the right people.
So can you elaborate on it? Obviously, I'm assuming you're mentioning, not just the story of the company founding, but also the company culture, the company values, the vision of the organization. All of those are part of that story, right? Yep. The overarching story of the company. And obviously the leader has to be the one that's owning it and sharing it. And I think in the early days, you might have more of a one-to-one transfer of that information that can happen in the startup stage. But once the company is 50 employees or over, there you go. Now the founder is not going to have the capacity to meet with the new employees or the new talent that are coming in the boat, coming on. So what are some best practices on sharing that the company culture and everything? I'm assuming before you apply was the platform where you share some of that information, right? You're sharing that, but what other better ways have you seen organization doing? What other ways have you seen them kind of sharing that tribal knowledge across the organization to keep the company's culture grow?
I think in terms of content or assets and distribution, I think it's like the simplest way to look at this stuff. It's like, what are the things that you can create to give a job seeker all of the information they want before they have to have a conversation with anybody? Because what that does is that helps people opt themselves in or out. The best thing that you can do on the recruiting front for recruiters and for job candidates is have them both engage in a productive conversation. And I think too much of recruiting is unproductive, and recruiting is very expensive. A recruiter's time is very expensive. And I think a lot of times, especially like at the very top of the funnel, is you have recruiters spinning their wheels, candidates spinning their wheels. Everyone's having the same conversation. It's like, how many times can I say the same thing over and over? Instead of going like, okay, what is the information you need and how do I transfer that to you through content to make this process a lot more efficient? And so there's just like a couple core things that I think have the biggest impact. One is a simple FAQ. You see an FAQ in sales all the time, right? It's like a buyer FAQ. Well, the flip side of that is a candidate FAQ. It's like what are all the questions that job seekers have when they have conversations with your recruiters? It's the easiest thing to create. It's like you talk to a recruiting team or you talk to hiring managers and go like, what are all the questions people are asking you? You put those together in a document, and that is like an upfront asset. I think like a founding story is one that's just like really, I think it's like foundational. It's like a staple that everybody should have, is like a founding story in blog post format that can just like live on your website, and it can be distributed, in email and things like that. That's like why you started the company. Another thing, I mean, you probably see this like in B2B sales, but like, how many times do you go to a website and you have like no idea what the company even does? Just like, what is this? And if you're a job seeker, especially if you're like sit on the product side and it's not clear, it's like a total red flag. You just like want to opt out because you're like, I don't even know what the hell I'm building. And so, what do you make? Who's it for? And why do they care? Is like the best prompt to create content from. It could be in like one blog post. It could be whatever. So I think about it from a product perspective, very clearly stating like, what do you do? Who's your buyer? Why do they care? What's the future vision? Founder story, FAQ. I mean, those are three simple assets that would like, honestly, in all of the like employer branding audits and companies we've worked with, and I mean, between the agency and between Before You Apply, I haven't come across anybody who has like all three of those in place.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen with the Before You Apply platform, you have the employee stories that you have different questions that you make them answer, and you have them kind of reside on your platform as video assets. Can you talk to a little bit about like where would you host all this? Obviously, you can have the blogs about company culture, why you founded, all of those things could be as a blog post. But do you see all this as under a career section of the website where you can host all this and make it more easily accessible?
Yeah. It could all be housed in just one landing page. I think of career sites in terms of landing pages, because I think it's like, as we get like further into recruiting, people's knowledge starts to wane, right? It's like less and less and less. And so if we like present it, if it gets presented in terms that like most people already understand, especially if it's associated with like revenue generating things, then it can like click. So like landing pages are marketing. They're designed to convert prospects into customers. And so career site is a landing page designed to convert job seekers into hires. And so if you think of that as a landing page, and it's just like, okay, if somebody were to land on this page, what are all the things that they need to know to make an educated decision about applying or having a conversation with the recruiter? And that's where they should all live. With Before You Apply is like a really interesting approach. We take a very interesting approach. It's a unique approach in a way, because we're like behind it, we're a creative services company. Like the videos that you see on our website, those are hosted by us. Like we actually conduct an interview like this with members of teams at companies. And we've learned through doing a lot of research, just straight up talking to talent, what are the things that they want to know before they apply? That's why we call the company Before You Apply. But like, what do they literally, like, what do they care about? And often it's not what companies think they care about. Companies want to talk about themselves a lot, and they want to talk about the things that they care about. And there's oftentimes there'll be a mismatch between what they care about and what a candidate cares about, because they don't spend any time talking to their market. Totally different than it is in the marketing world. In the marketing world, like UX research with your market is like part of your job. But in the world of recruiting, it's not. And so what we've done is like, we continue to do extensive research to know what candidates want. And we position our questions in a way that they're pointed. They're designed to be, to get transparent answers and to get people talking about the things that they honestly never get to talk about outside of work. And it's designed to give job seekers information they'll never find on a career site and they'll never find in a job description. So we actually host those interviews. We know how to pull information out. We're mostly interviewing engineering teams, and engineers, generally speaking, aren't the most like conversational people, but we know how to like pull information out and get them talking about the things, again, that we know the external market cares about. And we package them up in a way that is like deliverable as a landing page. And so it's just all reverse engineered off of things that we know that the job or the candidate market cares about.
Mm-hmm. Were there any surprising findings that you found, like, oh, wow, there's a lot of people that care about these things that most companies actually overlook?
You know, I'll tell you the one thing we get pushback on, that surprisingly enough, is companies, especially startups, don't want to talk about how well they compare, how well they pay compared to others in their market. And, that's like not a surprising thing. It's not surprising that candidates care about it, but it is a little surprising how many companies don't want to answer that question. But it's like, it's pretty simple actually. Like when it comes down to it, they want to know like who their manager would be, how that person thinks. They want to know things like tech stack, why that stack is being chosen, growth opportunities, future vision of the company. They want to know about things like runway. So one question we ask is like, what's the financial health of the company? That's like kind of a bold question. Some founders lean into it and they're just like, oh, like they love that question. Some of them are like, we don't want to answer that question. But it's like, hey, like it's something that people care about,
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, because they're risking their career to come work for you, right? So they need to know, hey, man, 6 months into it, the company's going to say, we don't have any money.
I know. And like, you'd rather tell them up front. I would rather tell them up front, but yeah, it's cool. It's like, it's not the easiest way to get content, but I think it's the best way.
So obviously, what would you tell a founder of businesses, right? Like the importance of the employer branding. Like what would you tell employers that are not prioritizing? Like you said, the legacy brands have never really cared about this at all, right? And they barely do. But I think the tech startups are much more attuned to this, right? They're very knowledgeable about the importance of attracting talents because, like you said, they have to bring them from other tech companies that are fast growing, and they have to allure them to come work for you as a startup. But what advice would you have for other businesses? They're all hungry for great talent, but they're not doing anything in terms of proactively promoting their brand to attract talent. What advice would you give them?
The good news is that there's very little competition when it comes to this. Like, because like you said, it's just a neglected thing. So the bar is actually really low. The bar is really low, and it is actually inexpensive and extremely like pragmatic. Because it's easy to overdo it or think you have to overdo it, which then becomes a blocker. Oh, we got to create these videos. It's going to cost a lot of money and all this high product, whatever. It's actually none of that stuff. It's like, it is seriously like the transfer of the right information to the audience that you want to hit. That's all it is. It is like information and distribution. And like, I seriously, I break it down in like the most like simplest terms because this is like easy to digest stuff. and like the amount of effort that it actually takes to have a big impact is very minimal. And so if anybody wants to have an advantage, I mean, you're talking about like, costs to hire are extremely high. Whether you're spending a lot of money working with agencies, or you have an in-house team, whatever it is, the cost of hire and the cost of a wrong hire is very, very high. And so it's actually smart to try to turn the wrong people off. Like, try to get as many people to opt out than you possibly can. Because talking to the wrong people is expensive. Hiring the wrong people is expensive. You want to help those people properly evaluate and either raise their hand and say like, yes, I'm like actually like really interested in this, or you know what, this isn't for me. And that's where like, not to overuse the word transparency, it has become an overused word, but like, that's where like the more transparent you can be, the bigger the filter that you're creating is. And that's what you're like, that's what you're going for. But I want every founder to know that like, this is not a big lift. It's not a big lift. It's just like, invest in a couple things, but just think about information and distribution and how can you help people make informed decisions on whether a conversation's worth their time or not. And it's much different than selling a product or service. It's way, way more complicated than that. Because we're talking about humans and companies, and between humans and companies, there's many, many variables, and making a match is really hard. And so you need to do everything you possibly can to help enable those matches to happen, because it's not as simple as a buyer moves into like in market and they start evaluating products and they do a couple demos and then they choose. It's not like that. It is, there's too many factors involved.
Yeah, I remember when we became a HubSpot partner, they mentioned to us like a bad hire in the sales role is like buying a BMW 7 Series and you never get to drive it. You just paid like $80,000 for a car that you can see it, but you can't drive it, right? So it's a waste of money if you make a bad hire. And also the opportunity cost, right? So not just only you wasted money in terms of salaries and compensation benefits, but if that person didn't produce what they were supposed to do, now the opportunity cost of lost time is even greater.
Totally.
And that you can't even put a dollar amount on it. So let's shift our focus a little bit about you. I know you've gotten a podcast, you have a lot of other things that you're doing. What are you doing for personal development to improve yourself as a founder, as a company leader? What are you doing in terms of growing in your skill as a leader?
So I've always been, let's see, I didn't expect that question. That's good. Let's see. I've always been an extremely disciplined person when it comes to this kind of thing. So what I do, diet, exercise, sleep. Those are like my three biggest things. I'm extremely, extremely disciplined. It works for me. But when it comes to diet and when it comes to exercise, it's like I exercise every day. Most days, like pretty like high intensity stuff, but it's just my space. Like I'm already looking forward. I'm going on a trail run this afternoon. Like I already got it planned. But it's how I clear my head. It's where I have my ideas. It's like, I come up with like, whether it's like posts that I'm going to put out on LinkedIn, or it's like things I need to talk to my co-founder about, or new ideas about like sales or marketing, whatever. It's like, I get it when I'm exercising. And diet for me is just like I'm 44 now. I have a 7-year-old, I'm running this business, dealing with a house. I got just like shit in my life. Like, it's just like a lot, and I'm not young. And so keeping myself fit allows me to do all the things with enough energy that I need to. I can't imagine if I wasn't. I mean, there's no way I could keep up with my son and ping pong back and forth between that and business and all this other stuff. So I just like really focus on that. Honestly, as far as like supplements go, I get blood work done multiple times a year. I just went to my doctor yesterday who analyzed my blood work. I'm on top of that. I I take supplements, like a lot of vitamin supplements. I also started, I live in California, like marijuana is legal here. So like, honestly, like, in the evening times, I've started supplementing with like a very small amount of THC gummies just to like give me like a different like perspective and aids with sleep. And like honestly, another business owner is the one who turned me on to that for those benefits. And so like, I've been this person. I even like ran like a natural foods business, in a previous entrepreneurial life. But like, I've always been this person who I monitor myself in the way that I feel and like what I'm doing constantly. I'm very in tune with my body. And so I tweak things a lot. It's just part of like kind of my thing. So, and then as far as like, I'm a podcast junkie, admittedly. I actually don't read books anymore. I don't make the time for it, is really the reason why, but I listen to almost everything on audio, and I listen to podcasts because I love long form conversations where I can hear people like really talk about like deep, interesting topics, and I can hear the nuance and all that kind of stuff. So like, I invest a lot of hours a week into listening to podcasts on all kinds of crazy topics.
And you mentioned about, great ideas you have, when you're doing your run and things like that. But obviously the execution is where everything happens, right? Like you can have a lot of ideas, but you can't execute, right? And to me, like my to-do list just keep growing every day. There's so many things, right? There's strategic things for the business, the tactical things that you need to do personally. You also have other, personal priorities and agendas. So how do you get things done? Is there anything that you do in terms of making sure that you get your, most important things are getting done and no urgent is getting in the way of actually focusing on what you need to do?
I've had problems with that in the past. I've gotten better at it. My co-founder one time, when he was my boss, he wasn't my co-founder at the time. I've gotten, I'll get to places where I'm too overwhelmed. I'll feel like, even like to the point of like feeling like kind of manic in a way. Too many ideas, too many things on the to-do list, whatever. I remember like talking to him one time and just being like, dude, I'm all over the place. I can't keep it together. And so he took me through an exercise where I wrote down everything that I thought was on my to-do list, and he's like, how many of these things, matter? He took me through this exercise where like, I ended up getting it down to like just 3 things that like actually mattered as it pertained to my job. Now I have less of a problem doing that. One thing that he and I do almost on a daily basis at this point, I live in California. He lives in Ohio. We're 3 hours apart. He used to live in California and it was great, but like we're 3 hours apart, but he's a night owl. I have a dog. So I walk my dog, multiple times a day, but almost every evening now, he and I do a walk and talk. And that's where we will like everything that has happened throughout the day at that point is kind of like sifted down. And then we'll talk about like, hey, we already planned it tonight. I already know what we're going to talk about. And I can't wait because he had a conversation that I really want to know about. But it's like, that's when the ideas happen. And that's when like the real ideas happen. There's a lot of like little ones that sound like they're good, but we have each other to bounce it off of. Different perspectives. He might like totally like blow up my idea, or it might be a great idea, whatever it might be. But then we have the luxury of being able to execute extremely fast. And so a lot of like the ideas that stick, like we ship them, like we get them out, which is really, really nice. But, man, I think anybody who has a busy life, your to-do list is always like, it grows. But I don't even know if I answered your question. That's just kind of my process. But
yeah, most certainly. The reason I asked, do you use some sort of a system like a EOS or Traction or anything like that to run the business in terms of having like the like your 3-year targets, the 1-year goals, and whatever all those things are, and then have your issues and your rocks and your tasks? Is there anything like that you use to run the business as a whole?
No, not really. We do. I mean, we have our stuff, like we have our investors, so we have investor calls like every couple of weeks. So we have to have our stuff prepared for that. And like, no, but not, not really. It's, for us, like we're at the stage of the business where we can, like, we have our core offering, but then there's other things that like we want to build out. And we have this mentality. We each have it like separately, and like we're just like lucky to be co-founders together. That like we experiment with stuff before we invest actual like money and resources into it. And so we've done this like a number of times where we will like actually like launch like an MVP offering. We'll spin it up really fast. We won't spend like hardly any money on it. We'll just get something out there. We have a great customer base already. And so we can just test it out and just see if it's something that people like really want to pay money for, if it has some legs. And if it does, then we will like start building it out and invest in it. And so we're constantly experimenting and just like testing stuff with the market. I also, here's a hack. I also use my LinkedIn as a way to test ideas. So what I'll do is like, I would say like half of my posts, I don't even have the idea fully formed. It might look like I do, but I don't. I'm just actually testing to see if people think it's a good idea or not. And that's another thing that we'll do, is we'll use my LinkedIn just to like test concepts. And if there's something there, then we can like work backwards from it. But
yeah. And I've noticed like if it depends on your LinkedIn connections, like if you had a lot of salespeople that actually, proactively reached out to you and connected with you, they're not very engaging with you in terms of what content you put out. But the people that are really meaningful, right? Meaningful connections, which is probably like C-level contacts that you've interacted with or you connected with. Those are the people that you want to hear from.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you can have a lot of followers, but it doesn't necessarily always mean they're very engaging and providing you feedback that you need.
I'm glad
At least that's been my experience.
Totally. Same. I think, we won't go down like the whole like LinkedIn content thing, but that is something that people miss is they don't understand quality of engagement.
Correct.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah, most certainly. Well, let's talk a little bit about your decision-making framework. I know you've said you're a proactive guy, just, decide and act on things. But is there like some sort of a decision-making framework that you go through when you're making strategic decisions, whether for your business or in personal life?
In my personal life, it's different. Because I got, family, and it's just like it's just different. But in business, we kind of have this rule where we never assume anything. So again, like I talked about experimentation first to prove like the concept and then invest from there. Right. Even before that, and just kind of like in my whole like professional life, like I said earlier, is like, I look at like cutting the timeline down for it to be as short as possible. And so it's like, and now at this point, like we built up like such a strong network of the right people that we will schedule, like if, we had like our product manager come to me before we were just like doing our latest like MVP launch. And she said like, I need to interview like these types of people. And I could just like, we're fortunate now because we've like over-invested into building our network that I can just message 10 people who are like the buyer persona, basically, but who are just friendlies, and just go like, hey, we need feedback on something. Would you be willing to do a UX call with our product manager? Like, and just schedule calls like that. And so it's like we like never assume. We get feedback directly from the market first. Then we do some testing. Then if it has legs, then we continue investing. And there's like, we've scrapped a bunch of things and saved ourselves a bunch of pain just by like never assuming. So I don't know if that's like an actual framework, but it's just kind of the way we roll.
Awesome. Is there any productivity hack that you have? Personal productivity hacks?
Yeah. Personal productivity. Yes. I never listen to music when I exercise. I only listen to audio stuff. It's, again, going back to ideas, like I'll be working out and I'll hear somebody on a podcast say one thing. And like 5 minutes later, I come back to the podcast because my brain went wherever else and it started to be, got me thinking. And I've done that for years and years and years. I've never listened to music when I exercise. I only listen to like whatever, like informational type stuff. There's that. I intermittent fast. I intermittent fast for like many hours a day. And, it's amazing for somebody like me who's kind of like is bouncing around from thing to thing. I never have to think about food. Like I don't ever have to stop to think about food. And it might sound weird to some people, but like not having to think about like, what am I going to have for breakfast or where am I going to go for lunch or anything like that is just like, it's just off my plate. Like I just do my thing, you know, and then I eat later.
Yeah, I certainly think intermittent fasting is very healthy. I've been following that for quite some time, and I was able to get rid of some excess fat and get lean. So it definitely helps.
It does. It totally helps. And it's like I've learned to whether it's food or it's just like other things in life. Like I don't have the space or the time or the energy to carry stuff around. Mm-hmm. So if I'm having an issue with somebody, I address it right away. If there's something that's eating me up, like mentally that I need to do, even if it feels like it's insignificant, I'll make sure to do that thing because then it like unlocks productivity. Like the more you carry around and the more decisions that you have to make, the more like bottlenecked you are from like being a productive and like happier person. And so I try to like shed all that stuff and just like, I live like pretty minimally personally. I just don't have the space to like carry around too much.
Same with the email too. They say, if you open the email, don't have to open it again. Just reply, delete, or defer to somebody else, or defer to future, or delegate to somebody else.
Yeah, very true.
Never look that again. So knowing what you know today, what advice would you give your younger self?
Honest answer? It's not going to be what you expect. I've been sober for many, many, many years. I would tell my younger self, I don't know if I would tell my younger self to not drink because I had a really good time. And like, those memories are like some of my best memories, but I think I would have told myself to like stop drinking at 25. I carried it on a little too long. But that fundamentally changed my life when I got sober like over a decade ago. So that's actually what I would tell my younger self is you got some
advice.
Yeah. You got some stuff coming up, buddy. You might want to stop.
You need to keep those brain cells.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, Nate, I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your life experience and wisdom with our audience.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been great.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.